extensions, you need to get the Azure account. Show you get Azure account. So you need to get the Azure account, which is one, and then you also need to get the Azure function, which is two. These two actually are the at least the minimum that you need to get started, right? And when you connect with the Azure account itself, you get this A here. And if I expand this, and that gives you the opportunity to do deployments inside of this function app. That's the reason why you need the Azure function piece, because that's what I like to do any deployments in here. So now we've got that set up now. The first thing we're going to do is that we can create a function app in Azure, or we can go through the advanced mode. I prefer to use the advanced mode because it walks you through the steps one by one, just registering. All function apps have to be globally unique. So in that case, we're going to go with training, and sometimes it's not available. Training uh, 2025 now, 0108. Right, so it's 2025. Got to get used to saying that now in the new year. Now, there's an option here where it says select this hosting plan. Now, plans are basically machines that can be provisioned for you to run your code on. That's what Microsoft is asking you for here. Consumption plan is owned by Microsoft. They own everything. They own the scaling of the physical machines, they own the networking. I always recommend using this out of the box if you're new to Azure. So that way you don't have to worry about figuring out how to connect, do networking and VNet integration. All that stuff goes away. This actually is handled by Microsoft. Now, the Flex consumption plan is still in preview, so I don't really like talking about preview products. And the premium plan is when you know what you're doing and you know how much money you're willing to spend and you know how many physical servers you're willing to scale up to. You go with this. This is an expert level setup. App service plan is an intermediate between the consumer plan and the app service and the premium plan, where you still Microsoft will guide you through how many instances you can spin up to, and then they will take care of hosting the machine. So that, and then you have to implement the auto scaling yourself. So this is the only difference here. You have to implement auto scaling yourself. This one here, Microsoft takes ownership of scaling up the service for you, which is the reason why I suggest consumption plan. Select a location of for new resources. Yeah, that's important. You need to figure out what region you're in. I'm in East US, but if you're in a different part of the country, you have to find a region that you're closest to, so that way you can spin up your environment. We're using a .NET 8. We're going to keep that. We're using an operating system. You have a choice, Linux or Windows. We're going to go Windows. This is where we create our resource group. We're going to go with the default name if that's available. Then we have to create a storage account, which allows us to push our files, our code to a location. And then the final one is the application insights, which basically monitors our API performance and calls out anything that might be bottlenecks or issues that we can address those. So I'm going to create that last one. And hopefully we walk through all the steps here. This takes about a minute to provision. So let's go up here and hit refresh. So here we have our resource group that I mentioned. And then here we're going to have our resources that are going to start spinning up slowly over here. Here's an app service plan, which I mentioned to you before. And the app service plan is on running on a Windows operating system. And also on the left side of the plane here, when I expand this, like I mentioned to you before, Microsoft owns everything. You don't get to configure your network. You don't configure any scale up or scale out options. Those are all grayed out. This is the best option for getting started. Once you're more proficient in this area, then you can use the other plans that I mentioned earlier. So this is getting spun up. So we do have application insights here, which is basically going to be capturing our performance or telemetry for our API. Storage accounts is going to be used for our file drops. And then this new one here, which is Log Analyst Workspace, is basically a Splunk type way of actually looking at all our logs that are passing through our system. And we'll get to this at the last step when we're actually querying the performance of our environments. All right, so it looks like this is set up successfully, which is good news. No issues there. Now, there are two ways we can deploy a code. Like if you're running on a local machine, like I am, and you want to deploy straight into Azure, you could just right click here and you can just deploy your Azure function, click the button. It's going to ask you maybe one question and it's going to start the deployment. So it's going to ask you, are you sure you want to deploy this? Blah, blah. You want to override previous this thing. We're not deploying from here, so we're going to cancel. The other way you can do your deployments is through a CI/CD pipeline, which is a recommended approach, right? So if I go close this and I go into my GitHub repository here, right, we're going to deploy this code through our CI/CD pipeline. So the best way we can do this, there's two ways you can do this. You can create a YAML file in here, which is basically how new deployments are done, or you can let Microsoft take care of that for you, or Azure take care of that for you. So for getting started, what I tend to do is go into the function app itself and then go into my deployment center. And instead of my deployment center, then I can actually do the deployment from inside of the function app because that's what we're trying to get the code to. Microsoft has introduced a way to connect to GitHub from here, which is actually good. And then because I'm already connected to my personal access token, I don't have to put any authentication in here. I can select my organization and then to try to give me the options of the different deployment options I have here. I'm doing data ingestion into Azure. So this is what I'm working on here. And then I'm going to select the branch as master. And I'm going to, we can preview this. Microsoft, this is the boilerplate YAML file that Microsoft creates for us. And I hit save. And that should push out all the things that we need into Azure. Let's see. Okay, so that's getting deployed. So what that does here is it creates this file, and if I click here, it should take me back to my build. It puts a YAML file in here for us. If I click on the work file, you will see that this YAML file is already placed in here for us really nicely. So, and then what is done is I've actually clicked the build us as well. So you can see the build is actually going, it's actually pulling out the .NET files, it's going through the deployment steps, it's trying to pull down the actual solution file and it's going to then build out the dependencies. Now this takes a couple of minutes, takes about 3 to 4 minutes. So rather than watching this deploy, we can actually build out the remaining requirements. So we go back here, you scroll down to the requirements here. We have to build out the service bus, and we're also going to build out the SQL database. So that's two ones we have to build out today. So let's get back to that. Make sure that we're good here. Second. All right. So we're going to go ahead and build out the SQL database now. So let's go over here, go into our resource group here. When in doubt, go into a resource group. That's what I would say. And then we can open up the and here now in our resource group, we can go up to the create button. And every time you hit the create button inside of Azure, it takes you to what we call a marketplace. Let me show this anymore. And I'm going to type in our first one, which is our service bus. And then we're going to select the first one. Let me hit create. And it walks you through the process of installing it, so you don't have to worry about what the steps are. So it puts me in my subscription, it defaults to my only resource group that I have. So I don't have to worry about that. Then I'll have to type in the what we're using. We're just keeping the same name, training 2024, 2025, 0108. That's available. ECUS2, keep all your resources in the same location. So if it's ECUS2, you keep it ECUS2. Pricing is also here. So if you're in a corporate environment or enterprise environment, Microsoft recommends using this option because it gives you unlimited messages and retrievals. If you choose this option here, which is what we're going to choose, you're limited to 12.5 million across a month. So Microsoft sees that using too many messages in one day, it will throttle you. And we might get that experience today when we start doing some testing. We're keeping the default TLS networking is only available for the premium plan for private, so it defaults to public. And for tagging, you need to make sure you provide a cost center here. If you actually have billing issues, you make sure you have a cost center. Microsoft actually talks about that as well. So go next. Hit the tags. Go ahead and create this. And then we're going to head back to our resource group. And while that's getting created, I'm going to create the second resource, which is our SQL database. So Azure SQL. Now, Azure SQL is a little bit more involved because it's not just as easy as service bus. There's a lot of steps that's involved in setting this up. I'm going to just walk through that. I successfully got deployed. So in Azure, you have three flavors. And because Azure is a very big resource used on-prem, is in Azure, it's pretty big, it's very popular. Microsoft gives you three flavors. You can lift and shift, meaning that you can just bring what you have on-prem into Azure or your data center into Azure. And then you can choose the SQL Server SQL Server version that you have on-prem, and you can apply that on the Windows operating system as well. And then you have exposure to RDP. So basically, you get like an RDP, like a data center. You set up your own networking, you handle your own patching. That's the default, right? So if you're just coming straight to Azure. Now, the kind of in-between solution is where you don't have the server, you can't RDP. Microsoft owns the instance, but you can actually have your agents do all your backups. You can still continue to do your traditional um, you can bring your license to this to a synchronized instance. So it's kind of a half baked solution where you have more, Microsoft handles it, but you actually handle the rest of it. And networking is handled by Microsoft as well. Now this one is all Microsoft. Microsoft owns everything. From the physical server to networking to replication to the backup. So you just have to configure what you want, and that's the default. This is the one we're actually going to be using today. So when we create the SQL Server, there's a couple of things. It's going to default to the only resource group that we have. So you notice it pre-fills some of the information here for us. Microsoft says we want to use Azure. Microsoft actually offers 100,000 vCores, which seems like a lot, but isn't. And you can apply for this as a preview, but we're not doing that today. And you have to create your database and you have to create a server. So we don't have any of these things. So we're going to build that out today, right? So I'm going to go with the training. So we're training 2020 training 2025 0108. Grab that. And since we don't have a server, we have to create one, right? So we're going to create a server, put in the same name. Make sure I point it to the same location. Microsoft recommends that. So if you're on East US, even though it's default East US, I'm East US 2. Some things to note, Microsoft does offer a couple of flavors. Active Directory, which is now Microsoft Intra ID, is basically offered as here as a default. So they're assuming that you're on an Active Directory environment. So you can just authenticate with your SSO account and you're good to go. And then here this is an option that gives you SQL and Intra. You can use that. But in that case, since we don't have support for any of these two, we're just going to go with traditional username and password. So we're going to go with SQL admin, and then we can create a password for that. So that's good. So now that's all set up now, the next thing we're going to do is choose our compute and storage. Very important. This is very, very important. If you don't choose anything, Microsoft is going to choose one for you. So you have to go in here and configure your database. Um, Database out of the box, if you don't do anything, you get two vCores. And Microsoft charges you per core. So if you went up to three, you will get charged. Well, I don't offer three, you have to go up to four. So it's 2, 4, 6. It looks like it's even numbers. You can get five, you have to go six. So you get two cores each. So we go from 2 to 4 to 6. So every time you jump a core, it goes up in price. And then you can decide what size disk you want here. You can scale this up to wherever you want. I think it scales up to, I forget what number is, but you can see that's a scale up, you pay more money. The other option you have, if you don't want to do all these, which is slightly more expensive and you just want to get started, I'll recommend go and use what we call the budget friendly. Microsoft actually calls it budget friendly for a reason. And this is when you convert from the vCores to DTUs. You can read up on DTUs later on, but basically it's a split between your IOs and your memory and your CPU division, and you just buy as you need. And the more DTUs you buy, the more allocated space you get for all those three options. I normally hover around 200 200 DTUs for the demo. That gives you around 294 a month. And this for most businesses, intermediate businesses, they run between 50 and 100 DTUs. For big ingestions, you want to be up to 200. So you're moving millions of records, you want to be around that area. So I'm going to apply this. Backups, like I mentioned to you, Microsoft owns everything. So backup storage, redundancy, Microsoft tells you what you need to do, and they give you the options that are available on their system to do backup. You have point in time restore, meaning that if something fails, how far back can I go and restore the data? I think it's 5 minutes. Microsoft gives you a guarantee the point in time restore up to 5 minutes. And then long-term retention is basically allows you to retain the data as long as you need. So 7 years, something they can you have to configure that as well. The backup storage redundancy here is you have the local redundancy, which is basically typically what you get in a data center. Zone redundancy just means two separate data centers in the same region. A geo redundancy here is meaning that you have basically two copies of each storage in two separate regions. So you have four copies in two separate data centers, and that's basically what the default is here. Keep clicking next here. Connectivity method here, I always keep as no access because you don't want people coming into your SQL. If you make it public, you're gonna get hit. A lot of people are actually monitoring this endpoint, so you're gonna get a lot of traffic and they're gonna try and break your server. So I recommend keep it no access or make it private endpoints. Connectivity here, we're gonna leave the defaults. Go next. We're not gonna use this start a trial. Actually, we can use start a trial because we're gonna wipe the database out by the time we get to the next set. We hit next. Tags again for cost for billing. We're going to create these resource now. All right, so this is getting created now. So we've done a couple of things. We've set up our function app. We done the CI/CD deployments, service bus. We're setting up the Azure SQL piece now. And if we go back to our resource group, we can see things are starting to come together now. We have a couple of resource groups here already inside of 14. It's our last 30 minutes that we put this in together. So now these things are getting deployed. We can go into our function app here and see whether that was successfully deployed. So far, everything's been going good. So, because this is a live demo, all is green. So, what this means is that these are all the different things that a function app offers. Very, very powerful resource. So I always recommend have this in your back pocket for solutioning in Azure. Blocks, blob triggers are basically designed for file drops. They work like a file watcher. If a file gets dropped somewhere, you pick it up, it processes it. HTTP triggers, typically RESTful endpoints. We're used to that. Timer trigger is a cron job or a batch job. If you're used to saying that, it's actually monitors. You can set this up as well. And the rest, the service bus trigger is actually something that's not really normal in most systems, but we actually offer that. Function apps actually have those capabilities to actually listen to a service bus and pull messages off. So we actually have two of them, one for NoSQL and one for a SQL database. And the rest are basically HTTP triggers. So now we have this successfully pushed out first time. We're going to set up a couple of things now. So we're going to go into our configurations and we're going to start doing some key value pair setups. So back to our documentation, scroll all the way down, come past all this, look at how far we've gotten here. We've created a SQL database, service bus, function app has gotten deployed. The code has gotten deployed as well. Service bus is set up already. Timer trigger is part of the function app. And we did a CI/CD deployment as well to push that out. So all that is done. Now we're going to set up the configurations that was needed to connect all these things together. So now we're just connecting dots. The Azure Web Job Storage is already set up, so we don't have to worry about that one. So we're going to go and set it up. So we click on this button here on top. And then a couple of things have already been added for us as a prerequisite. This is fine. We don't have to worry about this one. This is already added in. So we're going to add in the config path. And we can talk about where that's coming from later on. I'm going to allocate it to a folder called config. And we're going to set it up later on in when we get to the storage account section. API key, we're going to set it up as well. I'm going to add that in. So here's API key. You can call it X API key, and I'll show you what we're using that when we get to doing some demos. App name has to be unique. Add that in. I'm going to call that 2025. Wow, 0108. Yeah, apply that. And then we go to the next one. Storage account, basically just pointing back to Azure Web Storage. We're just going to use that one. We add that in. That's pointing back to Azure Web Storage. Apply that. And we're going to add the service connection. Now, we don't have the service bus connection string, unfortunately, because we just provisioned it. So we need to collect that information because the brand new service bus. So why do I keep this open? Open up another window and just authenticate into Azure, and then we can actually pull that information out. And actually, I'll open up another window as well because we need to sign in one more time. We're gonna have a couple windows open here. So I'm gonna see if I can get service bus connection string. So we can go back to the home to our resource group. Anytime you're in doubt, always go to a resource group. And that way you can actually see all your resources in one place. And the first one we're going to collect is the service bus. So in service bus is interested because the way their connection string is stored in a thing called a shared access policy. You have to click in the root and then you can grab the actual primary connection string. You can take that back here. We can paste that in here. So we have that now set up. And if we go back to our documentation, we have to add in the connection string for our database, right? So we're going to copy that, go here, we're going to add that in. And because we don't have that either, we have to go and grab that as well. That's the reason why I had two connections. So I go into here,